Now, for more on Beijing's expansion and its economic impact, let's bring in Uwe Brandes. He's Executive Director at Georgetown University's Urban and Regional Planning Program. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, Uwe, what stands out to you as the highlights from Beijing's urban plan?
Well, I think we have to put this into perspective. If we take the Boston-Washington corridor in the United States, we have 55 million people. If we look today at the entire Beijing region, the Jing-Jin-Ji region, we have 110 million people. We're talking about urban planning that really transcends any individual city. We're really talking about larger regional planning, the planning of a new mega region that could grow to be up to 150 million people. So just putting it all into perspective.
And certainly worth noting that the numbers really are mind-boggling in terms of the undertaking that this is. Now, we know that there are these efforts to move some of these non-capital functions of Beijing. How would that work and what would the impact be?
Well, even there, we have to, again, take a step back and understand the motivations behind this recent approved plan. This is a city that's 5,000 years old. This is a cultural legacy of such an important city globally in terms of our human heritage. And so the current plan today is really about managing growth responsibly, not endangering the cultural resources of the city, and creating a positive, paradigm for people living in the city. And that not all economic uses can be in the city center of Beijing. This has to be a regional approach.
Now, with such a huge change, what sort of business opportunities could come along with this?
Well, I think most importantly, this is not just about the city center. This is about developing a region. So important to this is an entirely new backbone of high-speed rail that connects the city to other sub-centers, a series of satellite cities, and really, including Tianjin and many other regional cities, a whole network of urban communities. And there are many development opportunities that will occur as these sub-satellite cities develop further.
And as we look at some of these, what do you think could be done to really curb some of these surges that we're seeing in the property prices in areas such as Tongzhou and Chong'an?
This is a very serious issue. This is an issue that cities around the world are facing. So it's not unusual that Beijing has to face this as well, particularly in its capital city. So it is very important that land use regulations get put into place which allow for equitable development, that certain price controls get introduced through subsidies to make sure that a workforce can live in the place where employment opportunities are present.
Now, we know that this plan comes as the government is still working on some of its cooling measures for some of the hot property markets there. How do you think now adding this layer of this very ambitious plan, how might that perhaps have some challenges?
Well, it has a challenge in the sense that everybody naturally wants to live in the center of the city, and that's just not always going to be possible. And there will be market mechanisms which encourage people to move out of Beijing's, the central Beijing. So it is really important to understand that this new mobility network in the form of high-speed rail allows people to live in one city and work in another. This is very sophisticated regional planning, some of the most sophisticated regional planning occurring around the world.
And certainly a very delicate balance. We know that Beijing wants to manage its population, but it also wants to become an innovation center. How do they strike that balance?
Well, one of the things that we see when we look at innovation economies in cities today is that the quality of life is one of the most important drivers of attracting an innovative workforce. So these are important considerations that have worked their way into this plan. Part of capping the population of central Beijing is really to make sure that it continues to be a very human-centered, very livable location.
And so how do you think that's going to affect the economy then, if they're able to make that shift?
Well, it's affecting the economy already. More and more people are moving to the region. There are cities like Tianjin that have literally popped up overnight. And we have to see this as an entire system, an entire very complex economic network.
And we know that this is it's a blueprint at this point. It's very long term. We're looking at perhaps 2035 to beyond to 2050. What are some examples you think of other cities, if you can compare them on such a scale, that Beijing could perhaps learn some lessons from and know what to avoid?
I think that's a great question. And in the previous report, we heard a mention of Paris. Paris is a centralized city that until very recently didn't have a larger regional strategy. I think that the city planners in Beijing have really learned their lesson not to concentrate too many people just into one city, but to really take this regional planning approach.
All right, well, thank you so much for your insights. Great to have you on. Uwe Brandes, Executive Director at Georgetown University's Urban and Regional Planning Program.